Translate this. I'll give you my job, sneered the Arab billionaire. But when the maid's daughter stepped forward and did it flawlessly, every soul in the room froze. In a glass tower above New York City, a billion-dollar deal was dying. One man's pride, one woman's silence, and one girl's courage, about to rewrite them both. Translate this, said billionaire Zayed Al-Jamil, his voice dripping with mockery. And I'll give you my job. The room laughed. The maid froze. Her daughter listened from the hallway. Every insult, every word. They thought she was invisible. They were wrong. Because when she stepped through that door, 14-year-old Emily Reed held more power than every man in that boardroom combined. This isn't just a story about a lost translation. It's the story of how a maid's child humbled billionaires and changed her mother's life forever. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. Enjoy the story. A 14-year-old girl held the fate of a billion-dollar deal in her hands. But she was standing in the hallway, invisible, and inside the room, the billionaire was about to destroy her mother. The penthouse boardroom of Covington Tower was silent. The silence was heavy, like a wool blanket soaked in water. It smothered the sounds of midday New York City, 60 floors below. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park was a perfect green rectangle, a calm painting for a room that was anything but calm. Arthur Covington, the owner of the tower and the city's biggest real estate mogul, dabbed his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He was a man used to getting his way. He was not used to sweating. But today he was sweating. The deal of his life, a 10-figure contract to build a new global cultural center, was crumbling into dust. Gentlemen, Arthur said, his voice straining to sound smooth. I must apologize again. The translator, a terrible accident on the freeway. Simply unavoidable. Across the massive obsidian table, Zayed Al-Jamil did not move. He was a man of immense wealth, carved from the deserts of the United Arab Emirates. His fortune was new, but his lineage was ancient. He wore a traditional white gutra and a gall, which made him look more like a king than a businessman among the gray suits of the New York team. His two aides sat behind him, their faces impassive. Mr. Al-Jamil had just spoken for 10 solid minutes in passionate, flowing Arabic. He had used his hands. He had pointed to the architectural models. His voice had risen with vision and then fallen with deep disappointment. And no one in the room had understood a single word. The only sound had been the quiet, almost invisible footsteps of Helen Reed. Helen, 45 and weary, was Arthur Covington's most trusted maid. She had worked in his private penthouse and his personal boardroom for a decade. She moved with a practiced grace, refilling water glasses and coffee cups, her eyes always down. She was part of the furniture, a silent witness to a dozen deals, celebrations, and failures. Mark Ellison, Arthur's vice president, leaned forward. Mark was young, slick, and believed he was the smartest man in any room. He saw the missing interpreter not as a disaster, but as an opportunity to show how he could handle a crisis. Mr. Al-Jamil, Mark said, his smile wide and false. While we wait, perhaps I can walk you through the financial projections again. We can use very simple terms. Big numbers. You'll understand. Zayed Al-Jamil's dark eyes snapped toward Mark. He raised one hand, and Mark Ellison's smile vanished. Simple terms. Al-Jamil's English was perfect. It was sharp and cold, like desert air at midnight. You think I am a fool, Mr. Ellison? No, sir, of course not. I just meant. You meant, Al-Jamil said, rising slowly to his full height, that you are unprepared. You invite me across the world. You promise me a bridge between our cultures, and you cannot even provide a bridge for our words. He gestured to the models on the table. This is not just about steel and glass. I spoke of legacy. I spoke of my grandfather, who built a school with his own hands. I spoke of art, of history, and you want to show me big numbers. He was angry. His frustration filled the room, pressing down on everyone. He started to pace, his white robes flowing behind him. This is the problem with your people, he said, his voice rising. You have no soul. You see a building, I see a story. You see a contract, I see a promise. And you see nothing. His eyes scanned the room, looking for a target for his frustration. He looked at Arthur Covington, sweating in his expensive suit. He looked at Mark Ellison, who now looked like a pale, frightened boy. And then his eyes landed on Helen Reed. She was standing by the coffee service, her hands perfectly still, holding a silver tray. She had been trying to leave the room, to become invisible again, but his tirade had frozen her in place. The billionaire stopped. A strange, cold smile touched his lips. "You," he said, pointing a long finger directly at Helen. Helen's blood ran cold. The entire room, the mogul, the VP, the two aides, all turned to look at her. She was suddenly, horribly visible. "Sir," she whispered. "You have been standing here," Al-Jamil said. "You have been listening. Perhaps you are the expert Mr. Covington has hidden from me. Perhaps you are the brilliant translator." Arthur Covington let out a choked sound. "Mr. Al-Jamil, please. That is Helen. She is staff." Mark Ellison saw his chance. The billionaire was making a joke. Mark could get back in his good graces. He burst into a loud, braying laugh. "That's a good one, sir." Mark chimed in, stepping forward. "Helen? Goodness, no? Helen just keeps the place tidy. Her expertise is in coffee, not contracts. She probably doesn't even have a high school diploma." The words hung in the air, brutal and sharp. Helen felt the blood rush to her face. She felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall. She had endured so much in this house. She had heard whispered insults. She had been ignored. But this was different. This was public. It was cruel. She looked at her boss, Arthur Covington. He was looking down at his hands, saying nothing. He would not defend her. He needed this deal too much. Al-Jamil watched the exchange. He watched Mark's casual cruelty and Helen's silent humiliation. He found it all deeply distasteful. But he was also a man who tested everyone he met. He pushed people to see where they would break. "You find this funny, Mr. Ellison?" Al-Jamil said, his voice quiet again. "You laugh at her. But you are the one who failed me." He turned back to Helen. The cold smile was gone. He looked almost curious. "I will make a wager," Al-Jamil announced. The room tensed. "I am a man of honor. You all come to me with your big numbers. You think you are so smart. I think you are hollow." He pointed at Mark. Your job. What is it?" I am Senior Vice President of Global Strategy, sir," Mark said, puffing his chest out slightly. "Vice President," Al-Jamil repeated. He nodded. "A very important title." He then turned back to Helen. "Maid. I will make this simple. You." He pointed at her. "Translate one sentence of what I said in my language. 1. Tell me what I spoke of." Helen stared, her heart pounding. "Sir, I cannot. I don't." "Go on, Helen." Mark laughed, enjoying the show. "Impress the man. Say anything. Maybe you can tell him where the best cleaning supplies are." The room filled with laughter again. The other executives, silent until now, joined in. It was a nervous, terrible sound. They were laughing at her to appease the billionaire. Helen Reed lowered her eyes. "I am sorry, sir," she murmured. "I do not understand Arabic." "Of course you don't," Mark said, slapping the table. "What did I tell you? She knows her place. Some people are just meant to serve coffee. And you," Al-Jamil said, his voice suddenly like thunder, "are meant to be silent." Mark's smile froze. Al-Jamil looked at Mark with pure contempt. "You think this is a game. You are weak. You mock this woman, who does her job, while you fail at yours." He looked at Helen. "And you have no dignity. You let them treat you like a dog." He was disgusted with every person in the room. "This is over," Al-Jamil declared. "The deal is dead. My time is wasted." He motioned to his aides. They stood, gathering their briefcases. Arthur Covington looked like he was going to be sick. "Zayed, please. Wait. We can find someone." "You will find no one," Al-Jamil said, walking toward the grand oak doors. "Because you do not value people. You only value money. And that is why you will fail." He was 2 steps from the door when it opened. It did not open wide. It opened just enough for a small, 14-year-old girl to slip through. She had pale blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a plain gray sweatshirt. She was clutching a thick, heavy book to her chest. It was a college textbook. The title read, "Islamic Art and Architecture, from Cordoba to the Taj Mahal." It was Emily Reed, Helen's daughter. She had been waiting in the hall for her mother's shift to end. She had come straight from the public library. She had heard the raised voices. She had heard the Arabic. And then she had heard the laughter. She had heard Mark Ellison's voice. She knows her place. Helen's eyes widened in horror. "Emily, get out of here. You cannot be in here." Emily paid no attention to her mother. She did not look at Arthur Covington, who was staring, confused. She did not look at Mark Ellison, who was gaping at the interruption. Her blue eyes, clear and steady, were fixed on only one person, Mr. Zayed Al-Jamil. "Excuse me, sir," Emily Reed said, her voice small but perfectly clear. Al-Jamil stopped, his hand on the door handle. He looked down at the girl. He was annoyed by this final, bizarre interruption. "What is this? You bring your children to your failures now, Mr. Covington." I don't know who she is," Arthur stammered. "She is my daughter," Helen cried, rushing forward. "Emily, please go. Go now." "Mom, it's okay," Emily said softly. She never took her eyes off the billionaire. She took a deep breath. And then, in perfect, respectful, classical Arabic, she spoke. "Sir, you said that your grandfather built the Al-Rashid School in the desert with his own hands, not for profit, but because knowledge is the only oasis that never runs dry. You said that you did not come here to build a monument of glass, but to plant a seed, a story for your grandchildren and for theirs." The room went absolutely, deathly still. The only sound was the faint gasp from one of Al-Jamil's aides. Mr. Al-Jamil's hand dropped from the door. He turned slowly, fully, to face the 14-year-old girl. His dark eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in a profound, sharp, and total disbelief. Mark Ellison looked back and forth between the girl and the billionaire. What? What did she say? What's going on?" Helen Reed stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. She was looking at her daughter as if she had never seen her before in her life. Emily continued, her Arabic flawless, her tone respectful. "You also said," she continued, "that you were angry. Not because the interpreter was missing, but because their hearts were missing. You said they saw only numbers, but you see the legacy of your people. And you said you were disappointed that no one in this room, not even the man who wants your money, had the strength to be respectful." She paused, then switched back to perfect, unaccented English. "And then, sir," Emily said, looking at Mark Ellison, "you made a bet. You said that if my mother could translate one sentence, you would give her Mr. Ellison's job." She looked back at Al-Jamil. "I am not my mother, but I am her daughter, and I believe I have translated more than one sentence." She held his gaze. "I am here," Emily Reed said, "to help my mother collect her new position." Mark Ellison's face was a mess of purple and white. "What did you say?" he sputtered, looking at Helen. "What is this? What did you teach her?" Helen was trembling, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Emily, I told you to wait in the lobby. Please, go. This is not. You don't understand." "I understand, Mom," Emily said, her voice quiet but ringing with a strange new authority. "I understand they were laughing at you." "Security," Mark Ellison yelled, his voice cracking. He lunged forward and grabbed Emily's arm. "Get this brat out of here. This is a private meeting." "Hold." The word was not shouted. It was spoken with the force of a command that expected, and always received, instant obedience. Zayed Al-Jamil had not moved, but his presence suddenly filled the room. Mark Ellison froze, his hand still on Emily's arm. "Let go of the child," Al-Jamil said in English. His voice was dangerously soft. Mark released her arm as if it were burning. Zayed Al-Jamil walked slowly toward Emily. He was a tall man, and he loomed over her. But Emily, clutching her heavy textbook, did not step back. She held her ground. He studied her. He looked at her blonde hair, her simple clothes, and her clear, unafraid eyes. He was a man who could read people. He saw no trickery here. He saw something he could not explain. He switched back to Arabic. His tone was no longer angry. It was inquisitive, deeply curious. "Who are you, little one?" he asked. Emily replied instantly in the same formal Arabic. "My name is Emily Reed, sir. I am the daughter of Helen Reed. I came to walk my mother home." Mark Ellison looked wildly at Arthur Covington. "What are they saying? Arthur, do something." Arthur held up a hand to silence him. The deal was dead. Now, a 14-year-old girl was speaking fluent Arabic to the billionaire who had just killed it. Arthur Covington did not know what this was, but it was something. He would be quiet and watch. Al-Jamil's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your accent. It is clean. It is not from the television. It is not from a school. Where did you learn the language of my grandfather?" "From my great-grandfather, sir," Emily replied in Arabic. "Your great-grandfather?" "Yes, sir. Robert Miller. He was a soldier, and then a diplomat. He served with the British in North Africa during the war. After, he became a scholar. He said that to understand a people, you must understand their poets." He taught me. A flicker of recognition crossed Al-Jamil's face. Robert Miller? The one who wrote The Sands of Wisdom? Emily's eyes widened. You know his book? I read it at university, Al-Jamil said, a strange wonder in his voice. It is a book of great respect. He is your family. He was, Emily said, her voice catching for the first time. She touched the cover of the heavy textbook she was holding. This was his. He passed away 2 months ago. He left me his library. He said books were the only bridge that could never be burned. She looked up at him, and for a second, she was just a 14-year-old girl. I study every day, to honor him, to make him proud. Zayed Al-Jamil was silent for a long moment. He looked at the girl, and then at her mother, who was watching this exchange with a look of pure, terrified bewilderment. So you were in the hallway, Al-Jamil said, piecing it together. You heard my anger, and you understood it. Yes, sir, Emily said. I heard you speak of your grandfather. I heard you speak of legacy. And then you heard them laugh, he finished. Emily nodded. Yes, sir. I heard them mock my mother for not understanding. Helen Reed finally broke. Emily, stop, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You'll get us fired. We'll lose the apartment. Please, Sonny, just apologize and let's go. Emily turned to her mother. She put her hand on Helen's arm. Mom, did great-grandpa Robert ever teach us to be quiet when we are stepped on? He said dignity is the only thing we own. He said no one can take it unless we give it to them. She turned back to Zayed Al-Jamil. My mother is a good woman, she said in English, her voice now loud enough for the whole room to hear. She has worked for Mr. Covington for 10 years. She has never been late. She has never been sick. She serves coffee and cleans up after men like him. She pointed at Mark Ellison, who treat her like she is invisible. But she is not invisible. This is outrageous. Mark Ellison finally found his voice. Arthur, are you going to let this child speak to me this way? After she spied on a private meeting? Spied. Zayed Al-Jamil's voice cut through Mark's whining. He turned his full attention to the vice president, and all warmth was gone from his face. She did not spy, Mr. Ellison. She listened. Something you failed to do from the moment I arrived. He walked, with a slow, deliberate pace, until he was standing directly in front of Mark. You, he said, called this woman Helen. He looked at Helen, a brief, respectful nod. You said she knows her place. You laughed at her. You turned her service into a humiliation. In my country, to dishonor a person who is serving you is to dishonor your own house. He then turned to Arthur Covington. And you, Mr. Covington, you are the master of this house. You said nothing. You let this man, this boy, poison the air. You let him disrespect his elder. You did this to save a deal. But you do not understand. A man who will not defend the weakest person in his room will never have the strength to be a true partner. He looked from Arthur's pale face to Mark's trembling one. This girl, he said, gesturing to Emily, this daughter of your maid, has more honor, more intelligence, and more legacy in her small body than your entire company. Sir, Arthur Covington said, finally speaking. His voice was hoarse. I apologize for Mark's behavior. It was unprofessional. It was more than unprofessional, Al-Jamil said. It was a failure of character. He looked at Emily. A slow, sharp smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed the game of life, especially when the board was suddenly and unexpectedly flipped. But a bet was made, he said in English, his voice resonating in the quiet room. I am a man of my word, and I am a man who respects a wager. He looked at Mark Ellison. You wagered your job. A vice president of global strategy. A very important title. That was a joke, Mark said, panic rising in his voice. It was banter. A figure of speech. I didn't mean it. You can't be serious. I am always serious, Al-Jamil said. You publicly wagered your position. You were so certain of your superiority. So certain that this woman, he gestured to Helen, was beneath you. You bet your entire career on her and her family's incompetence. But you, Mr. Ellison, were the incompetent one. You lost. Mark looked desperately at his boss. Arthur, tell him. This is crazy. You can't let him do this. I've worked for you for 8 years. You can't just fire me over a joke. Arthur Covington was a cold man, but he was a practical one. He looked at Mark, his eyes flat. He looked at the deal he had lost. Then he looked at Zayed al-Jamil, who was watching him, waiting. "A joke, Mark," Arthur said, his voice quiet. "You cost me the biggest contract of my life. You insulted a man worth more than this entire building. You humiliated my staff. And now, you want me to save you? You did this. Not the girl. Not her mother. You." Arthur, no. But Al-Jamil interrupted. He loved the drama. He was in complete control. "The bet was not that you would be fired, Mr. Ellison. That is a small, sad thing. The bet was that you would give your job to her." He pointed, not at Emily, at Helen. The room, which had been silent, seemed to fall into a vacuum. Helen Reed, who had been crying quietly, looked up, her face a mask of total, uncomprehending shock. "Me?" she whispered. "Yes," Al-Jamil said, smiling. "Those were the words. Translate this, and I'll give your mother my job." This young lady, he nodded at Emily, was simply the, how do you say, the attorney? The one who argues the case. "This is insane," Mark shrieked. "She's a maid. She can't be a vice president. She cleans toilets." Helen flinched as if she had been struck. "She can't," Al-Jamil said, his voice dangerously smooth. "And why not? Because she serves? Because she works with her hands? My grandfather, the one this brilliant child quoted, was a pearl diver. He worked with his hands. He could not read or write. But he was wiser than any 10 men I have met in this city. He built a legacy. What have you built, Mr. Ellison? A tower of insults." He turned to Arthur Covington. The smile was gone. "The test was here. Mr. Covington," Zayed al-Jamil said. "Your deal is not dead. It is sleeping. Its future depends entirely on what you do in the next 60 seconds. Arthur looked at Mark, his face contorted in panic and rage. He looked at Helen, who looked like she was about to faint. He looked at Emily, who stood, straight and proud, her great-grandfather's book held against her chest like a shield. And he looked at the 10-figure contract, sitting on the table like a life raft. "Mr. Al-Jamil," Arthur said, his voice shaking, This is highly irregular." "Legacy is irregular," Al-Jamil said. "Honor is irregular. You have one chance. Do you honor the wager, or do you stand by the man who shamed your house?" Arthur Covington took a deep breath. He was a builder. He knew when to demolish a failed structure. "Mark," he said, his voice as cold as the glass windows. "Clear out your desk." Mark Ellison's face went slack. The blood drained from it, leaving a pale, damp mask. Clear out my desk?" "Arthur, you're joking. This is assault. You're taking his side? A foreigner? Over me." "I am taking the side of my company, Mark," Arthur said, his voice void of all emotion. He pressed a small, discreet button under the lip of the table. "You are a liability. You have been for some time. This was just the final, public proof." "A liability?" Mark's voice rose to a shout. "I brought you the Al-Jamil deal. I set this up. You'd be nothing without me." He spun on Al-Jamil. You come in here with your robes and your..." He was shaking, words failing him. "You think you can just destroy my life? And for what? For her." He pointed a trembling finger at Helen. This nobody? This cleaner? You've ruined me for a joke." "I did not ruin you, Mr. Ellison," Zayed al-Jamil said calmly. He had taken a seat at the table, as if he were a king holding court. "Your own arrogance ruined you. You built a house on sand, and the first small wind has blown it over. And you," Mark shrieked, turning on Emily. You little witch. You did this. Spying. Listening. You set me up." He took a step toward her, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. Helen, seeing the threat, moved faster than she ever had in her life. She shoved Emily behind her, standing between her daughter and the enraged man. "No," she cried. "You will not touch my daughter." For the first time that day, Helen Reed's eyes flashed with a fire of her own. She was no longer a maid. She was a mother. Mark raised his hand, not to strike, but in a gesture of pure, sputtering fury. The boardroom doors opened. 2 large men in dark suits, Arthur's personal security, stepped inside. "Mark," Arthur said, his voice final. "It's over. These gentlemen will escort you to your office. You will pack your personal items. You will be out of this building in 10 minutes. You can't do this." Mark yelled. I'll sue you all. I'll tell the Post. You will do nothing," Arthur said. Your contract has a non-disparagement clause. If you say one word, you will forfeit your severance. Now go." The security guards took Mark firmly by each arm. He was a small man, and he deflated instantly, the fight gone. He was no longer a vice president. He was just a man who had lost his job. He looked small, pitiful. My things," he stammered, as they pulled him toward the door. "They will be mailed to you," Arthur said. They dragged him out. The heavy doors clicked shut, and the silence that returned was a new kind. It was not the heavy silence of tension. It was the empty, echoing silence of shock. Helen Reed was still standing, her arm protectively in front of Emily. She was breathing heavily. Arthur Covington sighed. He ran his hand over his face. He looked exhausted. He looked at Helen. "Helen, I. He didn't know what to say. You should sit down." Helen shook her head. "Mr. Covington, sir, I don't want that job." She spoke in a rush, the words tumbling out. "Please, Mr. Al-Jamil. It was a mistake. My daughter, she's just a child. She's bold. She reads too much. She didn't mean any disrespect. Please, I don't want his job. I don't want to be a vice president. I just want to clean. I want to go home. Please don't fire me." She was begging. After all of it, she was still terrified of losing the one thing she had. Emily looked at her mother, her heart breaking. "Mom, you don't have to beg. You didn't do anything wrong." "She is right," Zayed Al-Jamil said. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the park. "Helen, you have nothing to apologize for." "But I don't want the job," Helen cried. It's not right. I can't do that." "I know," Al-Jamil said softly, turning to her. "I know you cannot." Helen stared, confused. But the wager." "The wager," Al-Jamil said, "was about honor. It was about proving a point. It was about showing that man," he gestured to the door, "that the person he thought was lowest had more value than he did. The wager has been won. The point has been made. That man's arrogance cost him his position. That is justice." He smiled gently at Helen. "Your reward, Helen, is not to be burdened with a job you do not want. Your reward is knowing you have raised this." He looked at Emily. A lioness. Arthur Covington, ever the businessman, saw his opening. The deal was sleeping. He needed to wake it up. "So, the wager is settled. Helen, you are, of course, welcome to keep your position, as you've always had it. With a bonus, of course. A significant bonus, for this distress. A bonus." Emily stepped forward, her respectfulness gone, replaced by a cold disappointment. "Mr. Covington, that man humiliated my mother. You let him. And now you want to give her a bonus and send her back to the coffee cart." "Emily, hush," Helen whispered, pulling at her arm. "No, Mom." Emily stood firm. "Mr. Al-Jamil," she said, turning to the billionaire. "You said the bet was that he would give my mother his job. That means his office, his salary, his everything. She may not want the job, but she won it. It is hers to give away, not for Mr. Covington to take back with a bonus." Zayed Al-Jamil looked at Emily with an expression of pure, delighted surprise. He was watching a master negotiator, a 14-year-old girl, work. He stroked his chin. "She is absolutely correct. The position belongs to Helen Reed. The salary, the stock options, everything. It is hers, by right of a public wager made and witnessed." "Now, see here," Arthur began. "That is simply not." "It is simple, Arthur," Al-Jamil said. "You want my deal. You want to build my cultural center. You want my name on your tower. Then you will honor the bet. Fully. Helen Reed is now your senior vice president of global strategy. That is the first step." Helen looked like she was going to faint. "Sir, I'll resign. I resign." "Of course you will," Al-Jamil said, patting the air. "But not yet. You will first negotiate." He looked at Arthur. "Your new vice president, Helen Reed, has a request. She has a term of her resignation." Arthur Covington finally understood. This was not about Helen. It never was. This was about something else entirely. He looked at Zayed. He looked at Helen. And then, he looked at Emily. What is the term?" Arthur asked, his voice wary. Emily spoke. "My mother has worked for you for 10 years, Mr. Covington. She has a bad back. Her feet hurt. She is 45 years old, and she is tired. She doesn't want to be a VP. She wants to rest. She wants to see her daughter go to college without worrying about debt." Al-Jamil smiled. He nodded at Emily. Go on, child. Speak for your house. Emily took a breath. My mother will sign a paper, resigning from the position of vice president. In exchange, she looked directly at Arthur Covington. You will pay for my entire university education. All of it. Undergraduate and graduate school. Wherever I am accepted. Harvard, Yale, Oxford, wherever. Helen gasped. Emily, you can't ask that. I am not finished, Emily said, her voice clear as a bell. You will pay for my university, and you will pay my mother the full 10-year salary of the job she just won as her severance package. One lump sum. So she never has to serve coffee to a man like Mark Ellison again. Arthur Covington's jaw dropped. That is millions of dollars. That's blackmail. It's extortion. It is not, Zayed Al-Jamil said, his voice hard. It is the price of your disrespect. It is the cost of doing business with me. You want my deal? This is the price of admission. You do not get to save your 10-figure contract and save your millions. You lost a bet. Pay the winner. Arthur Covington was trapped. He looked at the girl. She was 14. She had just, in the space of 3 minutes, negotiated a multi-million-dollar severance package for her mother and a full-ride scholarship for herself. You are Arthur stammered, a very clever young woman. She is the granddaughter of Robert Miller, Al-Jamil said, as if that explained everything. She understands legacy, and she understands value. This is her value. This is her mother's value. Pay it. Arthur looked at the contract on the table. He looked at the 2 aides by the door, who had not moved. He looked at Al-Jamil, and he looked at Helen, who was staring at her daughter, not in fear, but in a new, profound, and blinding awe. He was a builder. He knew when a foundation was solid. He knew when to pay the price for the best materials. Done, Arthur Covington said, his voice hoarse. I'll have my lawyers draft the agreement. Helen, your resignation. Emily, your scholarship and your mother's severance. It's done. No, Al-Jamil said. Arthur froze. What now? We do not need your lawyers, Al-Jamil said. Their job is to twist words. I am a man of the desert. We make a deal with a handshake. And I do not trust your handshake, Mr. Covington. I trust hers. He looked at Emily. I have a condition of my own, Al-Jamil said. For the deal? For the cultural center? Anything, Zayed. Arthur said, desperate. My deal? Our partnership will have an overseer. A consultant. Someone who will ensure that the soul of the project is not lost. Someone who will ensure that the legacy I spoke of is respected. Someone who will bridge our cultures, as you failed to do. A consultant, Arthur said, relieved. Yes, of course. We can hire anyone. The best in the world. I have already chosen, Al-Jamil said. You will pay for her education. That is good. But her education must not be hollow. It must be real. She will learn from me. From my people. From my business. He looked at Emily. I am not offering you a job, little one. I am offering you an apprenticeship. You will be my personal consultant on this project. You will work with me. You will travel with me and my family, as your studies permit. You will be the bridge. You will be the translator, not just of words, but of ideas. I will pay you for this service. And I will teach you what your great-grandfather knew. He turned to Arthur. And that, Mr. Covington, is my final term. The girl. She is the key. Do you accept? Arthur Covington looked at the 14-year-old girl in the gray sweatshirt. She was the gatekeeper to the biggest deal of his life. Miss Reed, Arthur Covington said, his voice cracking. Do you accept? Emily looked at her mother. Helen, her face stained with tears, nodded. It was a nod of fear, of shock, but also of incredible, earth-shattering pride. Emily turned back to the 2 most powerful men in the room. I accept, Emily Reed said. On one condition. Al-Jamil actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of surprise. She has more. Just one, Emily said. Mr. Covington, I want you to apologize. Apologize? Arthur said, confused. I just gave you. Not to me, Emily said. To her. She pointed at her mother. I want you to apologize to my mother. For the 10 years you let men like Mr. Ellison treat her like she was invisible. For not defending her. Zayed Al-Jamil held his breath. This was the true test. Arthur Covington, the billionaire mogul, stood in his own boardroom. He was being dressed down by his maid's daughter, and the deal of his life hung on his next words. He turned. He faced Helen Reed. He bowed his head. Helen, Arthur Covington said, his voice low. I am deeply sorry. For my silence. It will not happen again. You are a woman of great dignity. And you have an extraordinary daughter. I apologize. Helen Reed looked at her boss. And, for the first time, she did not look down. She just nodded. Thank you, Mr. Covington. Emily smiled. Then the deal is done. Zayed al-Jamil's 2 aides, who had been statues of perfect composure, finally moved. One of them, a younger man named Khalid, stepped forward and bowed slightly to Emily. He spoke in Arabic. Little master, he said, his voice full of respect. That was a lesson in negotiation I have not seen, even in the souks of Marrakesh. Your great-grandfather would be very proud. Emily blushed, the 14-year-old girl returning for a moment. Thank you, sir, she replied in Arabic. Arthur Covington cleared his throat. The tension was gone, replaced by the awkward, buzzing energy of a crisis that had, impossibly, turned into a victory. He was still processing the numbers. He had just paid millions to save billions. It was a good deal. It was a great deal. Well, Arthur said, smoothing his tie. He was all business again. Zayed, my friend. We have a cultural center to build. We do, Al-Jamil said. He looked at his watch. My team will stay. They will finalize the preliminary contract with your team. The one we discussed. No changes. Of course, Arthur said, snapping his fingers. His own executives, who had been silent observers, jumped to attention, relieved to be back on solid ground. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Al-Jamil's aides to the South Conference Room. Get them anything they need. The aides bowed to Al-Jamil and left, followed by Arthur's team. Soon, the room was empty, save for Arthur, Zayed, Helen, and Emily. Arthur looked at Helen. It was the first time he had ever truly looked at her. Helen, he said, his voice quiet. The paperwork for your severance and for Emily's scholarship fund will be drawn up by my personal accountant. It will be on your kitchen table by tomorrow morning. You have my word. Thank you, Mr. Covington, Helen said. She was still trembling, but her voice was steady. And Helen, Arthur added, you do not need to, finish your shift. You can go home. Now. Yes, sir. I know. She looked down at her simple uniform. The blue apron. The comfortable, worn-out black shoes. She had put this on at 5 o'clock this morning, her back already aching. She felt a sudden, powerful urge to tear it off. But she didn't. She just unfastened the apron, folded it slowly, and placed it on the coffee service cart. She was done. Good, Arthur said, nodding. He looked at Emily. Miss Reed, I will see you soon, I expect. You will, Mr. Covington, Emily said. Zayed, Arthur said, offering a hand. Al-Jamil took it. Arthur, you are a wise man. You bent. That is why you will not break. We will build a great thing. Thank you, Zayed. Arthur Covington, the mogul, nodded once to the former maid and her daughter, and then left the boardroom. He needed a drink. Now, only the 3 of them remained. Zayed, Helen, and Emily. The billionaire looked at Helen. He saw the shock. He saw the exhaustion. He saw the terror of a life that had just been completely rewritten. Helen, he said, his voice now gentle. It was the voice of a grandfather, not a tycoon. You have had a difficult day. Yes, sir, she whispered. You should not go home on the bus. The subway. It is not fitting. Sir, we are fine. We always. No, Al-Jamil said, with a quiet finality. Today is not always. Today is the first day. My personal car is downstairs. My driver, Rashid, will take you home. He turned to Emily. And you, young scholar. Your apprenticeship begins not tomorrow. It begins now. Sir, a consultant must have the tools of her trade, he said. He reached into his robes and pulled out a slim, expensive cell phone. This is for you. It is a direct line to my office. My assistant, Amira, will be in touch. She will arrange your travel documents. Emily looked at the phone. It was sleek and black and worth more than their rent for 6 months. I cannot accept this, sir, Emily said. It is not a gift, Al-Jamil said sternly. It is equipment. You are on my payroll now. I pay you to be available. I pay you to study hard. I pay you to continue to be the granddaughter of Robert Miller. Do you understand? Emily looked at him. She saw the test. Yes, sir. I understand. It is equipment. Good. He smiled. He then offered his arm, not in a romantic way, but in the old-fashioned, courtly way a gentleman offers to escort a lady. He offered it to Helen. Helen looked at his arm, covered in the fine white fabric of his dishdasha. She looked at her own hands, red and rough from a lifetime of cleaning. Sir, Helen, he said softly. You are the mother of my most valuable consultant. You are a woman of great dignity. Please, allow me. Slowly, her hand shaking, Helen Reed took the arm of the Arab billionaire. Zayed al-Jamil walked them out of the boardroom, past the shocked secretaries and the silent executives. He walked them to his private elevator. They descended 60 floors in total silence. When the doors opened, they were in the grand marble lobby. The doorman rushed to open the door. A long, black Rolls-Royce was waiting at the curb. Zayed did not let go of Helen's arm until he had personally handed her into the plush back seat. Emily slipped in beside her. Rashid, Al-Jamil said to his driver. Take them home. Safely. Yes, Sayyidi, the driver said. Zayed al-Jamil looked through the window at Emily. I will be in New York for 1 more week. I will see you before I leave. Study hard, young scholar. Yes, sir, Emily said. The heavy door shut with a solid, expensive thunk. The car pulled away from the curb, silent as a ghost. Helen and Emily sat in the back, surrounded by soft leather and polished wood. They drove through the streets of New York, but they were no longer on the streets. They were floating. They passed the bus stop where Helen usually waited, her feet aching in the rain or the snow. Helen looked at her daughter. Emily was holding the heavy art book in one hand and the new, sleek phone in the other. Emily, Helen whispered. Yes, Mom. Did that just happen? Emily looked at her mother, and a slow smile spread across her face. Yes, Mom. It just happened. Helen leaned her head back against the soft leather. She closed her eyes. And for the first in 10 years, she did not think about tomorrow's cleaning schedule. She did not think about the rent. She did not think about the ache in her back. She just rested. The ride took 40 minutes. It was 40 minutes of silence. It was the silence of a life ending and another beginning. The Rolls-Royce, long as a boat, looked absurd parked on their street in Queens. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains. The driver, Rashid, got out and opened the door for them, as if they were royalty. Ma'am, miss, he said with a nod. Helen and Emily walked up the 3 worn concrete steps to their apartment building. They walked down the hallway that always smelled faintly of bleach and old cooking. Helen put her key in the lock. The lock was sticky. It had always been sticky. She turned it, and the door opened with its familiar squeak. They were home. The apartment was small. It was 2 rooms. It was clean. Helen had always kept it perfectly clean, but it was worn. The sofa was threadbare on the arms. The rug was faded. On the small kitchen table, there was a stack of envelopes. Bills. The electric bill. The gas bill. Helen walked in and stood in the middle of the small living room. She was still Helen Reed. This was still her apartment. But everything was different. She looked at the coffee pot on the kitchen counter. It was an old drip machine. She had it set to go off at 4:45 a.m. every morning. She walked over to it. She looked at it for a long time. Then, she reached out and unplugged it from the wall. She turned to Emily, who had been watching her. A single tear traced a line down Helen's cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. I don't have to make coffee tomorrow, she whispered. No, Mom. You don't, Emily said, her own voice thick. Helen sat down on the old sofa. She didn't just sit. She collapsed. The weight of 10 years, of 20 years, of a lifetime of hard work, settled on her. My own boss, she said, staring at the wall. He apologized to me. He should have, Emily said again, sitting beside her. And you? Helen said, turning to her. She cupped her daughter's face in her hands. You, my little girl. My 14-year-old lioness. Where did you? How did you learn to do that? Emily leaned into her mother's touch. I listened to great-grandpa Robert. He always said, I know. Helen smiled through her tears. Dignity is the only thing we own. She had heard her father-in-law say it 1,000 times. She had never known her husband. He was a soldier, like his grandfather, and he had died before Emily was born. Robert Miller, the war veteran, the scholar, had stepped in. He had been the father figure for Emily and the protector for Helen. He left me the books, Emily said, looking at the tall, overflowing bookshelf that dominated their living room. He left me the words. I used them. I was so angry, Mom. When I heard that man, that Mark, laugh at you, I wasn't scared. I was just angry. I knew what Mr. Al-Jamil was saying. I knew he was angry about legacy. I knew it wasn't about the money. And I knew great-grandpa Robert would have been angry too. Helen hugged her daughter, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Oh, Emily, my smart, brave girl. You saved us. No, Mom, Emily said, her voice muffled in her mother's shoulder. You saved us. You worked for 10 years. You endured them. You showed me what dignity was. Even when they laughed. You never broke. I just opened the door for you. They sat like that for a long time, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows into the small apartment. The next morning, a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for an amount that made Helen feel dizzy. It was more money than she had ever seen. It was more than she could even comprehend. And there was a contract. It was not from Arthur Covington's lawyers. It was from Zayed Al-Jamil's personal office. It was a trust set up for Emily's education. It was ironclad. And there was a simple, handwritten note on thick, cream-colored paper. Helen, rest. Your work is done. Let her work begin. CA. 1 month later, Mark Ellison sat in the sterile lobby of a competing real estate firm. He was waiting for an interview for a junior analyst position. The hiring manager came out. He looked at the resume. He looked at Mark. Mark Ellison, the manager said. You worked for Arthur Covington. Yes, sir, Mark said, trying to summon his old, slick confidence. I was senior vice president. I sourced the Al-Jamil deal. It was my funny, the manager said, his face unsmiling. I heard a different story. I heard a 14-year-old girl sourced that deal. I heard she got you fired for making fun of her mother. The story had become legend. It was the talk of every boardroom in New York. Mark's face turned red. That's a lie. It's a distortion. Is it? The manager said. We value respect. Here, Mr. Ellison. We can't have people on our team who are liabilities. I'm sorry. The position has been filled. Mark sat, stunned. He watched the manager walk away. He was not just unemployed. He was a punchline. He was irrelevant. 2 months later, the penthouse boardroom at Covington Tower was set for another meeting. Arthur Covington sat at the head of the table. Zayed Al-Jamil sat at his right hand. The room was filled with architects and engineers, looking at new models. The south entrance, Arthur said. Zayed, I think we should use Italian marble. A moment, Al-Jamil said. He looked to the end of the table. Miss Reed, what does our consultant think? Emily Reed sat at the table. She was no longer in a gray sweatshirt. She wore a simple, professional blue dress. She was still 14, but her eyes were steady. She looked at the plans. Mr. Al-Jamil, she said, her voice clear and confident. You said you wanted this to be a bridge. Italian marble is beautiful, but it is just another New York building. The entrance to the cultural center, perhaps it should be Omani limestone. It's what your grandfather used to build his school. It would tell the story. It would be a piece of your legacy. Zayed Al-Jamil looked at Arthur Covington. He smiled. Omani limestone. An excellent idea. Arthur Covington looked at Emily. He nodded. An excellent idea, Miss Reed. Make it so. That evening, Helen Reed sat on the small balcony of her new, comfortable apartment. It was not a penthouse. It was just a nice place, with a small garden. She was reading a book. Not a library book. A new book, from a store. Her new phone rang. It was Emily, calling from Dubai. She was there for 2 weeks on her spring break, working with Al-Jamil. Hi, Mom. Hi, Sonny, Helen said, smiling. How is it? Is it warm? It's very warm, Mom. You should see the desert. It's like great-grandpa Robert wrote. It's beautiful. I miss you. I miss you too, baby, Helen said. Are you being good? I'm trying, Emily laughed. Mr. Al-Jamil said I'm a harder negotiator than he is. I believe it, Helen said. You come by that honestly. Now, you study. But you be safe. I will, Mom. I love you. I love you too. Helen hung up. She looked out over the small garden. A billionaire had wagered a job, thinking he was mocking a maid. He thought he was testing her. But he was wrong. He was testing the legacy of a soldier. He was challenging the mind of a scholar. And he was betting against the heart of a daughter who would not, under any circumstances, let her mother be invisible. Helen Reed smiled and turned the page in her book. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.